this is David Sime. David's a lecturer and teacher from education background, but also really is heavily involved in the virtual reality space, and that's where we've kind of come together.
And Peter is an experienced lecturer, an experienced teacher, and teaches for oil and gas and various industries throughout the world, particularly in entrepreneurial schools, and has not been able to travel in the same way that he previously was able to and needed to for his job. Peter and I got together because we both realised that there was a massive gap in the ability to deliver teaching and lessons to students in different locations because of COVID, and also because of reasons of reducing carbon output and so forth. But we figured that this Zoom, Skype, and this kind of remote training had its problems, and that we figured that we could probably do better, maybe with virtual reality. So, Peter, what are your thoughts on current kind of post-COVID teaching methods online?
Yeah, so we've got all the platforms that everybody kind of currently uses, like Google Meet, Teams, and Zoom. And what I've found is that they're very two-dimensional, and it's very much driven. The energy is driven by the coach or the person that's doing the training, and there's not really much engagement. And that's a concern, because we want to get more out of them and be able to involve our students, attendees, whatever it was you want to call them, into the workshop, and it's very difficult to do that. So that's really why you and I got involved.
Yeah, because basically when you're doing this kind of thing, it's usually that one person has to wait for the other person to finish speaking before they can speak, because it'll block out their audio. So it doesn't lend itself well to natural conversation, particularly not group conversation, where people all need to kind of be able to talk at once or separate into groups, that kind of thing. It's just not very natural. Of course, this kind of thing does have an advantage over conventional teaching because there's no travel involved, which is great, particularly for people that have issues of mobility for whatever reason, would be they financial or physical or mental, and or just geographical. So it's good for that, but it's not really good for the kind of workshops and training that Peter delivers regularly, and I've also delivered in the past. So we got together and we ended up doing a trial, quite a successful trial, with, actually, do you want to tell them about the trial that we did?
Yeah, so we ended up doing a trial with University of Dundee, Duncan and Jordanston, and we worked with the students there over a couple of days, and we took them into a virtual reality workshop, and we did sales with them. And what we found was, well, three main points really, David, wasn't it? The first thing was that the engagement level with the students, they actually felt they were in a room, a real workshop room, and they were able to learn and to interact. And one of the things was they weren't tired at the end of the 2 days. And that was huge. And I wasn't tired from a teaching standpoint.
We actually got them to post up some feedback notes on Post-it notes in the virtual reality environment about what they enjoyed about it. And a few of the quotes are: being able to move and look around the space is more engaging. It was good for group discussion and workshop style learning. It realistically simulated a workshop space, and and it felt more engaging than Teams or a Blackboard, more natural. And more fun interacting with lecturers and classmates, which is really interesting. And then you talked about fatigue. Now, that had been mentioned by the students, less tiring than Zoom and team calls. Now, Peter and I both have had the experience of all lecturing and being exhausted at the end of it. And what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that Zoom is better or worse than a classroom environment for fatigue?
Well, Zoom's far worse. I mean, Zoom fatigue is now a word. I mean, I come off after an hour and a half. And the thing we have to do is, if you're going on Zoom for quite a long period of time, you tend to have to build in 15-minute breaks every hour or so into your Zoom, which we didn't have to do with this. The breaks followed a normal face-to-face workshop.
This is it, because you actually end up losing teaching time, was one of the things that you'd raised with me, because you're having to factor in these additional breaks for this additional level of fatigue. And it's not just the students who can be quite disengaged, and you're never quite sure whether they're away having a coffee, and leaving their avatar up. But they tend to get tired, or they disengage. They don't take things in because they're not there's no to and fro. But as a lecturer, it's akin to when you have a really, really unresponsive class and you're having to pour yourself into them for the whole duration of the lesson, which is just exhausting. Whereas if you get a nice interactive one with to and fro, it's not tiring at all. And you were saying that that's how you felt after this virtual lesson.
Yeah, and it was more a facilitator, because now you can use your facilitation skills because of the way virtual reality is. You can come up as a facilitator to a smaller group. You don't suddenly appear in a breakout room. So you can have that facilitation, and you can allow people to go off into a small group and talk while the main body of the group is still there. So all that's within a normal workshop is there in this virtual reality, and that's what I found about the whole thing.
That's interesting, because looking at it, I didn't actually deliver this one. I was just an observer, but I got the feedback from you, Peter, and from the students that they found that it was just much more like, it had all the advantages of a physical environment. But then, of course, a physical environment has its disadvantages too. We know from experience, and Peter's got a really good background in teaching neurodiversity and teaching for people that have maybe learning disabilities as well, that a physical environment doesn't always lend itself very well to people for reasons of anything from anxiety to dyslexia, reading difficulties, mobility difficulties, communication problems, and issues of literacy for whatever cause. How do you feel it compares to a physical environment in this regard?
It would be interesting to speak to some of the students that maybe have that neurodiversity, but I feel that what virtual does is it opens up the creative space around the visualization, and that's the big part. We know visual plus text is the most effective way, and that's what this opens up, is the creative part with people with neurodiversities. And they can do that, but we can also personalize it for the individual, and that's the thing that's so good about this. It can be personalized without anybody knowing.
Well, that's a very good point, because if you, for instance, with dyslexia, what are some of the ways that you can improve legibility for text, for instance, for dyslexics?
So, for instance, for somebody that maybe has a neurodiversity like dyslexia, they can put the background on that makes the words easier to read. They can put all the words to the left-hand side so that they read from left to right. We can make the text into the font into an Arial or a Tahoma, or something that is a bit more visually easier for them to use. All these different things can be brought in, and they can play about with it, but we can also bring in pictures and images. So images into the text to help them understand what the text is about is huge.
But of course, if you were to give somebody a workbook which was different for them because they had dyslexia, and it contained, different text, different font sizes, pictures and so forth, there's a potential stigma, a social stigma attached to that might discourage them from actually taking you up on that advantage. It's not even an advantage, that just that levelling field. But of course, in virtual reality, nobody else has to see that. They can be given exactly what you described without anybody else actually seeing that at all. They just look normal to them if they see anything at all. The other advantage that we have in here is that, having delivered lectures in college where people have to have scribes in to write down for them, take notes for them, we can do that using voice to text, voice recognition, and we can record the whole lesson so that people can come back to it and listen to it again, which of course you can do with normal digital learning environments. But again, it can all be text, speech to text, or vice versa, where it can actually be a screen reader, which is again really useful for people that have visual difficulties. So all of these things are possible in virtual reality. It can do it now, so it's really, really easy without any stigma, without anybody noticing that anything's different about any of the students.
Completely, and that also that visual space allows for embedding and learning and all these wonderful words we use, but it makes for a better understanding. And we got that feedback from the students. They saw that even at the level that we were at, they saw that this was better and engaging. And they went into it, and these are students from the Duncan of Jordanston, the creative side of it, coming into a sales workshop, and they loved it.
It's interesting, actually. I'm looking at one of the bits of feedback that said the interaction is more normal and social or sociable than video calls. For instance, unmuted chatting when you arrive, just like a normal classroom, able to hear group laughter, able to hear just the general group activity, which makes you feel that you're in a group learning environment, which is a wonderful thing. But what I really like about it is that in my background, I was working with people who were travelling from all around Scotland, which is obviously geographically dispersed, and it was a real issue. It was modern apprenticeship, so they were having to take a week out of their work, which their employers didn't particularly like. They were having to move from sometimes quite rural areas, highlands and islands, to quite built up city centre areas, sometimes for the first time in their lives, and stay in a hotel and be far from home for the first time, and at the same time take in all this theoretical information. And the only reason for that was it was the only practical way to do it. It was the only way that you couldn't bus them up and down from Glasgow to Skye every day or once a week. It was just that was impractical. Whereas and it caused problems of anxiety, it caused problems of overload of information, when actually it's really better to do a bit of theory, bit of practical, bit of theory, bit of practical. They weren't getting to do that. So with this kind of approach, they could, without even leaving work, they could engage in some theoretical learning and then take that into the workplace and use it that very day without any travel being required at all, without losing out on that vital social interaction, group interaction.
And the other thing moving forward is if you're looking at this it's easier to get people together because they don't have to travel. So globally, one of the students actually was in Rwanda. So it works all over the world. And for me, it's the down days of having to travel and having to fit all that in and then work with the client on that. So we don't need to do that now. We can bring them in from all over the world. So imagine not having to fly your management team in. The management team could come in here and have their own, meeting and do everything that they need to do from the office in their home country and build all that out. So there's lots to this which are really, really interesting moving forward.
There's also the lack of socioeconomic disadvantages of, not needing to travel, not needing to find the money to get to a place, to take time off work, to put yourself up in a hotel. These can be real issues, and because the system that we used didn't require everybody to be wearing virtual reality headsets, some of us were. Some of the facilitators, one of whom was in the Netherlands. So we had Netherlands, Rwanda, and Scotland simultaneously. But most people were just using PCs, laptops, MacBooks. There's even systems where you can use a mobile phone if you want, or a tablet. And it's not that they have to be particularly advanced either. The fairly basic ones will run these systems. So it really does remove a lot of the barriers, whether those be financial, physical, mental, whatever, that would stop people from engaging and benefiting from this kind of education.
Totally, and that you make a good point there. When we talked to the students, they were using the laptop, but they found themselves being immersed in it, even though they weren't in a 360 environment. Mm-hmm. As such. They felt immersed in there. They didn't feel like they were they forgot where they were. And they moved in there to the point where it's almost like we can set this place up so they can go in and have a virtual coffee bar and meet folk and sit and talk and chat as normal, given the current situation. But they could do that all over the world. So when they go back home in the summer, there's nothing to stop them having that connection with all their university colleagues, even though they're all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also raises another point where we can. It's not just restricted. The test that we did in this case was more of a lecture hall or workshop hall environment, albeit it was a very cool looking one on an island. But you can then take people into 360 photography or videography, where they are immediately immersed in almost like a classroom trip to anywhere in the world, be it the CERN Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, I believe, or France, and or an oil platform we've done before, in the middle of the ocean. There's no restrictions to where people can go. We even observed a rocket launch in 360, and it's quite awe-inspiring, even on a screen, and people are together and they can have these discussions with each other and see stuff. There's also the ability to bring in three-dimensional objects that they can build with or work with or manipulate. And so we're getting to the stage where you can do practical training on-site training, contextually relevant training, and group training, all without ever leaving your home or your office.
Absolutely, and it's so seamless the way the videos can run. The whiteboards are there, post-it notes. It's easy, and you can have as many as you want. It's infinite. It's not deemed by the number of walls you have and the space you have on the wall. Physically, if everybody wanted to, every one of them could have had a whiteboard. It's that kind of thing that you can build out with them. It's fantastic.
And everyone can have a screen. And the thing that always used to frustrate me is that when you were doing like a series of lessons, every Friday, let's say, for a series of weeks, but the cleaners had to come in or another class had to come in. So they'll have wiped off the whiteboards and removed all the post-it notes. So you have to kind of either take photos or remember where you were. Whereas in these situations, you can create what's called a persistent environment where that classroom is your classroom forever. Anything that you put up will remain there forever. And if you want to bring in a new class who's not been part of that intake, then you just give them a fresh classroom. You can have an infinite number of them, and there's really no restrictions.
No, and this can go anywhere, and that's what the power of this is. So we can take this out to the rest of the world, to places that potentially don't have maybe a strong Wi-Fi signal or a broadband signal or whatever words we want to use around that.
Mm-hmm.
It's around that way. The capability of this is to get this out to as many places in the world so that we can start to do a bit of learning and teaching and in education. And it's for everybody. Mm-hmm. This isn't for an elite bunch. This is for everybody, and that's why we've designed this.
What I find most encouraging is that there's been some independent research done by PricewaterhouseCoopers, amongst others, and Deloitte. But the findings of this in terms of soft skills training was that the retention after training was 4 times higher than in Zoom, or Skype or any of these other video conferences, which you might expect from what we've described, but it's actually higher than in a conventional classroom as well, which was a big surprise to everybody concerned. But, the engagement is certainly no lower than it is in a physical environment. And as we've mentioned, there's so many advantages over it. So as the new normal occurs, and even when we do have the ability to go back and be around each other whenever that occurs, I get the sense that just like in the business world, where a lot of things have changed and people have realised you can do stuff as well, if not better, remotely, I think education might be one of those worlds, if not the same as, maybe more so than the business world.
Yeah, I'm with you. I so think that. And in the year that we lost Sir Ken Robinson, isn't that fantastic that we now have the ability to unkill creativity? So do schools kill creativity? We can now help them to unkill and live and let creativity happen, because we saw that. We didn't go out to do it, but it found it. VR finds creativity.
It does. We've moved away from the necessity for a factory education environment to something which is can be a lot more personal. And I suppose you could be anywhere in the world and have access to the best teachers in the world. That one teacher could reach out from where they live without leaving home and reach out to people in any other part of the world. So all of those restrictions are gone as well. So we can get the best of all worlds, I believe. And like you say, the costs of actually implementing these in other countries is very low. We're talking the cost of a low-price mobile phone or tablet. We can rig them up with a local SIM card that will pick up on any bandwidth which happens to be there, and give them access to that live. That's not difficult. So the costs for implementation are far lower than building a school. So it could work really, really well in many situations. So I guess we've gone on longer than we intended to, but you can tell that we're quite enthusiastic about this. But it was we were hoping for a good result, but we weren't expecting just how good the result can be. And the other lecturers who were involved, in fact, Sandy, your mentor and very experienced lecturer, has been doing this for how many years now?
Well, Sandy's been doing training for a long time, and Sandy won't mind me saying that Sandy's one of our more experienced people on this earth, and he took it like a duck to water.
He did.
So it doesn't matter, it's ageless,
Mm-hmm.
and Sandy took it on and loves it, and physically loves the whole thing and wants to do more of it. So it's easy to do. It's a plug and play.
Yeah. That was the intention, wasn't it? That's what we were hoping for. That if you want a whiteboard, you reach over to where the whiteboard is and you pick it up. If you want a pen, you reach over to where the pen is. If you want to run YouTube, you press play and run YouTube. It was meant to be as easy, if not easier, than a normal classroom environment without your projector breaking down as well.
They make a good point. When we're travelling out to the Middle East, so we're going out there expecting, hoping that the projector will work, the PowerPoint all there.
Yep.
We don't have to do that because it's all incorporated and we don't have to worry about any of that.
Totally. So although it would have been good if we could have had an unbiased pros and cons kind of interview. It's all pros, I'm afraid. It's all good. So what we can do is we can link below to the results of the study, because actually the results from it were very, very positive, and give a bit more information about that. We're going to be doing another set of trials shortly, hopefully this side of Christmas, certainly in January, and there'll be education in professional environments, and they'll be taking place in 1, 2, 3 continents, I believe. And certainly observed by people from various sort of governments and so forth. So and large organisations. So this is only going to continue. So we will keep you posted in this one. But certainly our perspective, and my perspective, is more as a virtual reality person than as an educator, and Peter's perspective is more as an educator than a virtual reality person. Has been so far very positive indeed. So I hope to bring you on this journey with us.
No, appreciate it. Thanks, David. Long may we continue.